What's going on, everyone? It's Justin here, and today I've got a video of Apple's cheapest laptop for 2020, and that is the new MacBook Air. So when I was in school about 2 years ago, the most common question that I always got asked is what MacBook should you buy? Whether it was a 13-inch, the Pro, the one without the touch bar, or the MacBook Air at the time, which was not updated. And a lot of times I had a mixed response, and I used to personally be a big fan of the 11-inch Air as well as the MacBook 12-inch. But over the years, I've been using the 13-inch as like my most portable computer and also editing on a MacBook 16-inch. But you guys might know a couple months ago, I did sell all my MacBooks, the 13, the 16, and I switched to using the Mac Pro as my main computer and also the iPad Pro as the on-the-go. So obviously when this MacBook was announced a couple days ago, I went and ordered it myself, and I ended up going with the base model just to give you guys a video on whether or not the base model is the one that you should buy, and for most people, is it going to be enough? If you guys enjoy videos like this, I would also really appreciate if you guys subscribe to the channel and drop a like on this video, and if you have any questions, make sure you drop them down in the comment section below. At the price point of $999, it is the cheapest Apple computer, and if you go and use the education site, which they don't even check if you're actually a student, then you can get it for even less than that. And I feel like for a lot of students, this is going to be a very, very popular option, especially because the base storage has been doubled. So this is kind of like the second generation of the updated model, and last year the MacBook Air finally got an update after many years of waiting, and that included like a Retina display with a smaller bezel, as well as a new update to like the whole design thing, because before it was like the only computer that hadn't really fit into the lineup for a long time. I feel like quite a few people were skeptical of last year's model though, because it still had the old generation crappy keyboard, and even when it came to like performance, even though this is not a computer that is meant to be doing all of your graphics stuff, it just wasn't really that good.
So the performance on the MacBook Air 2019 has been very interesting. Like if you're just doing general stuff, browsing the web, editing a document, listening to music, or watching a video, it's fine. Like the performance is fine. But as soon as you start doing more than one thing, whether it's having 8 to 10 tabs open, or you're installing a file while watching a movie, the laptop starts slowing down, it gets a bit too hot, and it causes performance problems. The issue with the MacBook Air in general, and this goes for the 2020 model as well, is that it has poor thermals. It's always had poor thermals, and the reason being is because Apple does not connect a heat pipe between the fan and the CPU. What you get is a laptop that's constantly hitting 100 degrees Celsius, which is a thermal limitation of Intel CPUs. And when it gets that hot, the laptop has to try to slow down in order to compensate. And when your laptop starts to slow down, that's when programs and applications start to feel slower.
Even though the MacBook Pro 13-inch is not fat by any means, I just like having a form factor like this with a super thin computer that now has some decent power. So when the new MacBook Air was announced after not having a laptop for about 3 months now, I was pretty excited, and my intention with this computer is to use it for notes, writing articles, but maybe even a little bit of photo editing, but beyond that, nothing more that will really test it. So when it comes to the changes, for the most part, these are made internally. Obviously, because the redesign was last year, they didn't really have to change anything on the outside, but it includes better graphics, also double the storage for the same price, a lower price, and also quad-core processor options in the i5 and i7. Personally, for this video, I bought the cheapest model that is available on the website, and that is the i3 dual-core. But I'm going to talk a little bit about that later in this video as to whether you should spend the extra $100 to upgrade to the next level. The next biggest thing is also the keyboard, and this is using the same redesigned keyboard that we saw on the MacBook 16-inch and expect to see on all the MacBooks moving forward. This has a full millimeter of key travel, and it just has like a nice click to it, enough space and enough travel, and I think that whole era of butterfly keyboards is just something that is going to be completely forgotten about. I think it is also great that the computer also comes with 256 instead of 128 gigs of storage now, because 128 is honestly just too small. I mean, an iPhone at its mid-level has more storage than that, and by the time you have all of your apps installed and stuff, you just run out of storage, and with like future software updates kept in mind, I feel like 256 is kind of a good baseline, especially with everything now in the educational field being in the cloud. You can also spec this out to over 2 terabytes of storage, which is a full terabyte larger than the previous allowed. I think one of the biggest improvements that needed to happen though was the performance. There's 3 different options now, and they are all the 10th generation Intel Core processors, which is 2 generations than what we saw last year. So the base model that I have right here is an i3 that is dual core with a 1.1 GHz base clock and 3.2 turbo, and the next model up is the quad core Intel Core i5 with a 3.5 GHz boost, and the model above that is a 1.2 GHz i7 with 3.8 GHz boost. Apple says that this generation gives you up to 2 times the performance increase, which is great, and in terms of graphics, it is also an Intel Iris Pro as opposed to 617, which gives you up to 80% boost. The RAM is also slightly faster at around 3.7 MHz with the DDR4 RAM, as opposed to the 2.133 MHz DDR3. The SSD did also see a slight improvement in speed as well. So more specifically, is the performance of this computer better, and is the base model at $999 enough, and should you upgrade to a higher processor option? And from my experience after using it for a couple days, I will say that the performance is decent, but you just can't expect too much for a computer at this kind of performance level and intended market. It is very much meant for like web browsing as well as doing general tasks such as doing notes, your emails, and maybe a little bit of accounting. But if you're planning to do like photo and editing on a regular basis, you're almost better off buying like a used or previous generation MacBook that is a bit more powerful than this. In terms of everyday tasks, I was able to do everything as I usually would, with no problems at all, and I feel like the previous generation was one that, even though you were able to do most things, you kind of knew the limitations of it, and were still able to run into some hiccups if you had, for example, like too many things running at the same time. In my opinion though, even though $999 is not considered cheap, it is Apple's cheapest offering for a computer right now. And I do feel like you should upgrade to the at least quad-core i5 model, and when you go to like the i5 and the i7 differences, it is going to be much smaller than the difference you're going to see between the i3 dual-core and the quad-core i5. So the answer as to whether or not you should upgrade the processor is yes, and in terms of upgrading the RAM, I feel like that one is a little bit more of a toss-up. 8 gigs is going to be enough for most, but 16 will be very nice to have. When it comes to the display, it is pretty much exactly the same. It's a 13.3-inch 2560 by 1600 True Tone screen, and that was probably the biggest improvement that we saw last year. It is much sharper, looks better, but in terms of brightness, it could use some improvement. The webcam though is still 720p, which is kind of dumb in 2020, but the speakers and microphone have also been improved, with the mic quality being better in the triple setup. So here's kind of like a video and audio test of the camera on the MacBook Air 2020 as well as the improved mic setup. And honestly, the sound does sound pretty good from the previous clip that I recorded, but in terms of video quality, even though you're gonna get by with this for like FaceTime or just like a work call, it's nice to maybe at least have like a 1080p webcam when you're in 2020, but I don't know, I guess it works, but there just hasn't really been any improvement in a very long time. And also the speakers being 25% louder and also having 2 times more bass. One thing that I did notice though is that because this MacBook is so thin, when you have the speaker cranked up, it does make the entire computer shake. And when you're using like the trackpad and stuff, it just all kind of vibrates. That is a little bit nitpicky, but that's just something that I did notice. Even though speaker quality is an improvement, it is not better than the one on the 16-inch MacBook, which is to be expected. When it comes to the battery life though, this is an area where it is pretty much the same, if not a little bit worse, but for the most part, you're probably not going to notice a massive difference. It is 11 hours rated for like web browsing and stuff, which was kind of down from what it used to be at 12. From my personal experience, I was able to get a battery life anywhere from around 5 to 7 hours in real world use, and that included like some photo editing, a mixture of doing mail and also watching videos, and I feel like there's just so many variables with it. If you're using like Chrome, for example, that can take up more power. In Austin Evans' video though, he did open it up and take a look at the inside, and he did mention that there was a little bit of blank space that could have been for a larger battery. So maybe that's going to be something that we save for next year, now that all of the other kind of improvements and tune-ups have been made. But I feel like at this price point, you're going to be making a decision between like the iPad Pro that is nicely decked out with like a keyboard and everything, compared to a MacBook like this, which is pretty similar in price when you think about it. But even right now, I'm trying to figure out which computer is actually one that I like, because when it came to traveling, I used to actually take the 13-inch MacBook Pro with the iPad, and it just seemed very pointless. So I think looking into the future, the big talks has been the MacBook Pro 14-inch, which is set to replace the 13-inch MacBook Pro and kind of follow the lead of the 16-inch and the improvements that made at the end of 2019. We are expecting the MacBook Pro 14-inch coming later this year to be the first one in Apple's lineup to use mini LED display technology, which is thinner, brighter, higher quality range in terms of the color gamut, and also has the benefits of OLED for the most part without some of the drawbacks, including like lower brightness and also burn-in. This is something that I'm personally pretty excited and curious about, but at the same time, it is probably not going to make it to this MacBook because new technology costs more money, and for the most part, I think it is just going to be in the Pro models. What might come to the MacBook Air though that is very exciting is the fact that Apple is said to release a ARM-based CPU in the next 2 years. These are processors that are made in-house and will be integrated into the computers and will essentially give a MacBook the performance that you should expect out of like the iPad's optimization. Because nowadays, like the iPad Pro chips, in some cases actually score and benchmark higher than you get on some of the base MacBooks. And with Apple being very big on like ecosystem and how it works with the software and how it ties together with the ecosystem of applications, I feel like the MacBook Air and like the base MacBooks, especially for students, are gonna benefit a ton. I think as a creative, what is most exciting though is imagine this comes to like a pro computer, like the Mac Pro or the MacBook Pro with an ARM-based chip that Apple has made to work with their very own software such as Final Cut Pro 10. The performance improvements should be pretty good. But otherwise, I really hope you guys enjoy this video of the MacBook Air 2020, and I'll see you all in the next video.